In the years following the Civil War, a handful of former Confederate officers made choices that stunned their fellow Southerners. They didn't just accept defeat gracefully. They actively embraced the Union cause, became Republicans, supported Reconstruction, defended the rights of formerly enslaved people, and in some cases, literally took up arms again, this time fighting for the United States. These men were called turncoats, traitors to the Southern cause, scalawags, and worse. Former comrades who had once shared campfires with them now refused to shake their hands. Some received death threats. Others were physically attacked. Their names were erased from Confederate monuments and stricken from reunion rosters. But were they really traitors? Or were they simply men who recognized that the war was over and that the only path forward was genuine reconciliation? In this video, we're going to explore the fascinating and often tragic stories of Confederate generals who switched sides after the war. These are tales of redemption and betrayal, of political courage and personal ambition, of men caught between two worlds in one of the most turbulent periods in American history. Let's begin with perhaps the most controversial figure of them all. James Longstreet, the most hated man in the South. James Longstreet was born on the 8th of January, 1821, in South Carolina. By the time the Civil War began, he had distinguished himself as a capable U.S. Army officer, serving with distinction in the Mexican-American War. When war broke out in 1861, Longstreet resigned his commission and joined the Confederacy. He quickly rose to become one of General Robert E. Lee's most trusted subordinates. Lee affectionately called him, "my old war horse." Longstreet commanded the First Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia and played crucial roles in nearly every major Eastern battle. At Fredericksburg, his men slaughtered wave after wave of Federal troops charging against the infamous Stone Wall. At Chickamauga, his assault shattered the Union line and nearly destroyed an entire army. He was, by almost any measure, one of the finest corps commanders on either side. But it was Gettysburg that would haunt his legacy. On the battle's second day, Longstreet commanded the assault on the Union left flank. The attack was delayed, and though his men came agonizingly close to victory, they failed to dislodge the Federals from Little Round Top. The next day, Longstreet opposed Lee's plan for Pickett's charge, arguing that a frontal assault was suicidal. Lee overruled him. The charge failed catastrophically. When the war ended at Appomattox, Longstreet surrendered and settled in New Orleans. Then came the decision that would make him the most reviled man in the South. In 1867, Longstreet publicly endorsed the Republican Party and his old friend from West Point, Ulysses Grant. He wrote a letter urging Southerners to accept defeat and support Reconstruction. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Former soldiers who had served under him felt personally betrayed. Newspapers denounced him as a scalawag and traitor. But Longstreet didn't back down. When Grant won the presidency, he rewarded his old friend with political appointments. Longstreet served as surveyor of customs in New Orleans, a lucrative position that further enraged his critics. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. In 1874, white supremacist paramilitaries known as the White League attempted to overthrow Louisiana's Republican government by force. James Longstreet, now a general in the Louisiana State Militia, was ordered to defend the government. He rode into battle at the head of the Metropolitan Police, a force that included many African-American officers, against white insurgents, many of whom were Confederate veterans. Let that sink in. Robert E. Lee's old war horse was now leading black troops against former Confederate soldiers. The White League forces outnumbered and outgunned the police. Longstreet was shot from his horse, wounded, and briefly captured. The Republican government was temporarily overthrown before Federal troops restored order. For white Southerners committed to the lost cause, this was the ultimate betrayal. Longstreet had taken up arms against his own people in defense of black civil rights. The attacks on his reputation became systematic. After Lee's death in 1870, former Confederate officers began constructing a narrative blaming Longstreet for the defeat at Gettysburg. They claimed his delays had cost the Confederacy the war. This interpretation conveniently provided a scapegoat who had already made himself despicable through his political choices. Longstreet spent the rest of his life defending his military record while continuing to serve in federal positions. He died on the 2nd of January, 1904, at age 82. For decades after his death, he remained a villain in Southern memory, the traitor who lost Gettysburg and then became a Republican. Only recently have historians reassessed his military record fairly, but during his lifetime, James Longstreet paid dearly for believing that genuine reconciliation required accepting the war's political and social consequences. John Singleton Mosby, the gray ghost turns blue if James Longstreet was hated for his post-war choices. John Singleton Mosby was perhaps even more baffling to his former comrades. Mosby had been one of the Confederacy's most dashing partisan commanders. His daring raids behind Union lines had made him a legend. Born on the 6th of December, 1833, in Virginia, Mosby was a slight, wiry man who hardly looked like a warrior. But the conflict revealed hidden depths of cunning and audacity that made him one of the most feared men in the Shenandoah Valley. Mosby commanded the 43rd Battalion of Virginia Cavalry, better known as Mosby's Rangers. Operating in northern Virginia, his men conducted lightning raids that disrupted Union supply lines and captured prisoners. The area became known as Mosby's Confederacy. His most famous exploit came in March 1863, when he led a small band deep behind enemy lines to capture Brigadier General Edwin Stoughton in his bed. According to legend, Mosby woke the general by slapping him and asking, "Do you know Mosby, General?" When Stoughton replied, "Yes, have you got the rascal?" Mosby answered, "No, but he has got you." General Grant was so frustrated by Mosby's activities that he ordered captured Rangers executed without trial. When Lee surrendered, Mosby refused to be included in the terms. He simply disbanded his Rangers and told them to go home. After the war, he returned to his law practice in Virginia, seemingly destined to become another celebrated Confederate hero. Then, like Longstreet, he made a choice that shattered his reputation. In 1872, Mosby publicly endorsed Ulysses Grant for president. The reaction was furious. Former comrades cursed his name. He received death threats and was hung in effigy. When he tried to vote, a mob attacked him. Someone shot at him through his window. But Mosby was not easily intimidated. He had faced Union bullets for 4 years. He wouldn't be cowed by angry neighbors. His reasons were pragmatic. He believed continued Southern resistance to Reconstruction was futile and self-destructive. "The South is now living in the past," he wrote. "They are dead and don't know it." Unlike Longstreet, Mosby never claimed to have changed his views on the Southern cause during the war. He remained proud of his Confederate service until his death, but he drew a sharp distinction between the war years and the post-war period. The war was over, the South had lost, it was time to move on. Grant rewarded Mosby's support with appointment as U.S. consul to Hong Kong, partly an honor and partly a way to get him out of Virginia, where his presence provoked violence. In Hong Kong, Mosby proved an effective diplomat, combating the exploitative coolie trade. He lived until 1916, dying at 82 in Washington, D.C. He was buried with full military honors. But it was a Union veteran's funeral, not a Confederate one. The United Daughters of the Confederacy refused to participate. William Mahone, the railroad man who built an interracial coalition. William Mahone's post-war career represented perhaps the most serious political challenge to white supremacy launched by any former Confederate general. Born on the 1st of December 1826, in Virginia, Mahone was a railroad engineer before the war. He was small, reportedly about 5'6" and around 100 pounds, but possessed enormous energy and ambition. His greatest military moment came at the Battle of the Crater in July 1864. Union forces had tunneled under Confederate lines at Petersburg and detonated a massive explosive charge. When Union troops became trapped in the crater, Mahone led the counterattack that turned Union disaster into Confederate victory. He emerged as one of the most celebrated commanders of the war's final year. After the war, Mahone devoted himself to railroad interests before turning to politics in the 1870s, with choices that shocked the Virginia establishment. Virginia was deep in debt after the war. Bondholders demanded full payment, which would have required devastating cuts to public services. Mahone became a leader of the readjuster movement, calling for readjusting the debt to manageable levels. But the readjusters went far beyond fiscal policy. They built an interracial coalition that included African American voters as full partners. In 1879, the readjusters won control of the Virginia legislature. In 1881, their candidate became governor. Mahone himself was elected to the U.S. Senate. The readjuster government represented the most successful interracial political coalition in any Southern state during the post-Reconstruction era. They reduced state debt, increased funding for public education, including black schools, abolished the poll tax and whipping post, and appointed African Americans to positions of genuine authority. For the conservative Democratic establishment, Mahone was worse than Longstreet. He was building an alternative political order right in Virginia's heart. The Democrats fought back viciously. They accused Mahone of betraying his race. They used fraud and violence to suppress black voters. In 1883, a riot in Danville, probably instigated by Democratic operatives, killed several African Americans and helped swing elections against the readjusters. By the mid-1880s, the readjuster coalition had collapsed. Mahone continued as a Republican but never regained his earlier influence. He died on the 8th of October, 1895. For decades, Mahone was remembered primarily as a villain who had betrayed white Southerners. Only recently have historians recognized the readjusters as a genuine attempt at interracial democracy, crushed by fraud and violence. Joseph Wheeler, Fighting Joe rides again. Joseph Wheeler found a different path to redemption, one that allowed him to serve the United States without alienating his Southern admirers. The key was timing and a new war against a foreign enemy. Born on the 10th of September, 1836 in Georgia, Wheeler graduated from West Point in 1859. Despite standing just 5 feet 5 inches and weighing barely 120 pounds, he proved a ferocious fighter. He rose quickly to Major General at just 26 years old. By war's end, he commanded all cavalry in the Western Theater, participated in over 200 engagements, and had 16 horses shot from under him. His men called him Fighting Joe. After the war, Wheeler settled in Alabama, becoming a successful planter. Unlike Longstreet and Mosby, he did not embrace Republican politics. He remained a Democrat and participated in Confederate veterans' activities. But he also advocated for sectional reconciliation. In 1881, Wheeler was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, serving until 1900. Then came the event that allowed him to serve in the U.S. military without being branded a traitor, the Spanish-American War. In 1898, President McKinley, seeking to promote national unity, commissioned several former Confederate officers as generals. Wheeler, now 61 years old, eagerly accepted. For Wheeler, this was the opportunity he'd awaited. He could serve his country and demonstrate Southern loyalty against a common foreign foe. No one could call him a traitor for fighting Spaniards. Wheeler commanded the cavalry division that included Theodore Roosevelt's famous Rough Riders. At the Battle of Las Guasimas in Cuba, according to possibly apocryphal legend, Wheeler became so caught up in battle that he forgot which war he was fighting. As the Spanish retreated, he allegedly shouted, "Let's go. Boys, we've got the damn Yankees on the run now." Whether or not this occurred, the story captured something essential. Wheeler was a professional soldier who could separate wartime service from political loyalties. He later served in the Philippine American War before retiring. He died on the 25th of January 1906 in Brooklyn, New York, and was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Wheeler's path illustrated a different route to reconciliation. By waiting until he could serve against a foreign enemy rather than in domestic political conflicts, he became an American hero without alienating his Southern base. But this path had limitations. Wheeler never championed civil rights or challenged white supremacy. His reconciliation was between white Northerners and white Southerners, leaving Black Americans excluded. It was reconciliation built on forgetting the war's causes rather than addressing them. The road not taken. Looking back at these stories, we can see that former Confederate generals who switched sides made very different choices. Some, like James Longstreet, John Singleton Mosby, and William Mahone, embraced a vision of reconciliation that included African Americans as citizens with full political rights. They paid heavily for these choices, ostracized by former comrades, vilified in the Southern press, often erased from Confederate memory entirely. Others, like Joseph Wheeler, found ways to serve the United States that didn't challenge white supremacy. They were welcomed back into Southern heroism precisely because they posed no threat to the racial order emerging after Reconstruction. The difference matters because it reminds us that history did not have to unfold as it did. Some former Confederates, including men who had fought fiercely for the Southern cause, recognized that genuine reconciliation required more than forgetting the past. It required building a nation where all citizens had equal rights. They failed. White supremacy proved too strong. By the 1890s, Jim Crow was firmly established, and the vision of interracial democracy, championed by men like Longstreet and Mahone, had been crushed. But their example remained. They showed that even men who had fought for slavery could change, could grow, could recognize the humanity of those they had once helped oppress. Conclusion. So what happened to the Confederate generals who switched sides after the war? They lived complicated lives marked by both courage and contradiction. Some sought redemption and found only rejection. Others sought reconciliation and achieved partial acceptance. A few managed to serve the United States while remaining Southern heroes, usually by avoiding hard questions about race and justice. Their stories remind us that the Civil War did not end at Appomattox. It continued in Reconstruction's political struggles, in the rise and fall of interracial coalitions, in white supremacy's violent restoration, and in the long fight for civil rights that continues today. The Confederate generals who truly switched sides, not just putting on blue uniforms, but embracing the principles that uniform represented, made a choice we can learn from. They chose to accept that the war was over, and that building something new meant including everyone as equal citizens. History has shown which approach was more just. It has also shown which approach prevailed. Perhaps that is the most important lesson. The Civil War generation faced a choice between reconciliation built on justice and reconciliation built on forgetting. They mostly chose forgetting. We are still living with the consequences. But history is not destiny. Every generation gets to choose again.